on their own merits. From the few judges who began to question the efficacy of torturing witches to force them to confess their supernatural powers, to the implications of seeing people as more than a means to someone else's ends, to understanding the values of principles such as equality and democracy, reason allows us to see beyond limited cultural traditions and create a better, more just society. But let me come back to the idea of people as means to an end instead of ends in themselves. Immanuel Kant was probably the most influential philosopher in history. Kant expressed ideas that, until that point, were most likely heretical. Kant reasoned that morality was tied to human autonomy and that humans as ends in themselves gave life its special dignity. Contrast this with the biblical view of humanity, and I quote from J. Grisham Machen in his book, The Christian View of Man. He says, quote, "Man is made by God in his image for his glory." Kant, along with other Enlightenment-era writers of the late 18th century, laid the rational groundwork for overturning the biblical conception of man as a cog in God's machine, and made possible the blossoming of individual rights that we enjoy today. Without this reasoned shift away from the view of man as a tool for some greater benefit and toward true human autonomy, we wouldn't have the United States or any other democracy for that matter. Reason allows us to push beyond our evolved nature and regulate our moral intuitions. For example, revenge is a powerful instinct, but using third parties, such as law enforcement or our judicial system, to protect our interests instead of taking matters into our own hands, we have nearly eliminated the cycle of violence and revenge that plagued man for millennia. We have reasoned our way out of the age of tribal societies where revenge was sought on the perpetrator's family and descendants. Ask yourself, what type of distorted logic is needed to view 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 3 as moral? And I'll quote from the Bible. "Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass." This is a type of tribal morality that has slowly, painfully given way to reason. And who doesn't instinctively recoil at the sight of a child being hurt? But through our reason, we can see that there are some very good reasons to inflict temporary pain upon this child. We use reason to debate the issues and establish new norms. What are the ethics of stem cell research? Is same-sex marriage a net benefit for society? We are faced with issues that our ancestors never even considered, and our ability to rationally contemplate the consequences of our decisions is our only guide to a better moral future. To summarize, the sources of morality are evolution. Our moral instinct is a consequence of our social nature and is an evolved trait in the same way that walking upright and language evolved because of their survival advantages. Culture as a means for conveying established social norms. And finally, reason, our ability to rationally assess the consequences of our decisions and choose the path that is most beneficial. These natural sources provide a complete explanation for the source of morality. No God required. Thank you.
You know, I'm very glad to be here. I thank the Freethinkers of Upstate New York facilitating this. I thank you for the participants as well. And obviously, I'm kind of coming into hostile territory. So I'm definitely looking forward to an open and kind of live at times discussion, because the consequences of one's worldview and one's presuppositions are vital, and they determine how we act. When addressing this issue, the ultimate or core element is one of epistemology, foundations, and the solution must be first implemented at the epistemological level. This is where ethics get their foundation or lack thereof. This can be stated in another form. Where does ethics or morality come from? Or, in another form, what is the source of morality if one exists at all? Vital questions pertaining to this epistemological particular issue for the basis of ethics are as follows. Must ethics be objective, transcendent, and conscious binding? What is the rational apparatus by which ethics can function properly? Does Darwinian naturalistic materialism or Christian theism best provide the set of ethical standards? Finally, what are the consequences when ethics are abused, or whether by ignoring what is known to be right or living by a completely antithetical set of ethical standards to the correct ones? And that would be anything like moral relativism. Now, at the center of the subject matter at hand is not just a scientific matter, but a worldview matter, how we interpret the evidence. Science can be involved, but the issue will eventually begin and end at one's worldview. Whose worldview gives a rational apparatus for morality? The evidence will clearly indicate that a Christ-centered ethical system is coherent and is the only system which corresponds with reality as we know it. Simultaneously, this evidence will clearly display that any godless source of morality or ethical system, especially that of Darwinian naturalistic materialism, fails both logically and then fails existentially. And just so you know, to make a disclaimer, that does not mean, in any sense of the word, that godless people or people who hold to an anti-theistic worldview cannot behave ethically. Sometimes they put Christians to shame. And I say that to our detriment, just so you know. Because this is an epistemological question. So, this failure is broad in scope, that the proponent of naturalism and any other godless system of morality must appeal by borrowing from my worldview in order to sustain their own. The epicenter of this opening presentation will be kind of marked by three words: basis, borrow, and backlash. First, basis. Ethics, by definition, if we are going, as Aristotle said, to have any type of justice, must first be grounded in terms of an objective, transcendent set of standards. And in the Christian worldview, we have God is the epicenter, the character of God. And the divine mandates give, it pretty much is God's purpose, intention, and definition of things determines the purpose, definition, and identity of all else, including man. Second, we are created in God's image. Therefore, the law of God and His law alone governs human morality. For example, in Romans chapter 1, and I will read it for you. Starting in verse 18, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth, present tense, in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and divine nature, so that they are without excuse. This means that God determines the meaning, identity, as well as moral standing of every creature, for it is truly his creation.